All right, so here we are, part three of my discussion with Mr. Lance Fountain. And today we're going to talk about, in context of factory or mill or plant of the future, we're going to talk about technology. So, Lance, great to have you for this last installment. Had a great time chatting with you. As always, I learned so much from you. So, why don't you lead us off and get us started?
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity to do this three-part series. I think there's a lot to unpack in here, and I'm always anxious to hear feedback and input from others as well. But this is a journey we have to be on together, and I think it's going to take everyone's voice. But we do have to be very serious about the need for change. So when we left off the last time, Jim, we were talking a lot about the idea of companies wanting transformation. And transformation is not just one step and you wave your hands of it and say, there, we're transformed, we're done, back to business as usual. Transformation is about a series of iterative changes, iterative projects, if you want to think of it that way. And then eventually those projects that are all small changes in and of themselves lead to an opportunity to a bigger change. We talked about those bigger changes being the transformation themes like smart factory, autonomous plant, like remote operations centers or customer intimacy and intelligent supply chain. Those are big changes. But along the way, we have building block projects that are little changes that will eventually enable bigger change. We have to keep the end in mind. Now, the reason I start there as we start this technology discussion is we've got to think about when we get into these building blocks and we're doing individual projects within these building blocks, we got to think about how we do them. And the tendency I've seen in companies is they want to do these projects quick and easy, right? And that's okay. Like everyone wants to get the value, but they want to do them quick and easy, and they kind of treat them as one-offs, right? We're just going to do this project. And the example I can give is this: when we do projects, typically, we want to go get data. If it's a visualization analytics project, even an MES project, or an ERP integration project, we're getting data and we're going after data that we know we have somewhere in a control system, but we're doing it quick and easy, right? Well, I can get that data. I have OPC UA, and then I go and get the data and say, there, it's done. And then I do my next project, and it's the same thing. I know where to get that data. I can do that, and we do it, and we're done. That's a one-off mindset and approach, and I think it's key to call out here. And what I'll equate it to is, can you imagine in your house if every time you bought something new that was electric, can you imagine uh, going out and saying, hey, I just bought this new TV. Now I need to put an outlet in. So now you're going to do a project to pull new wire. You have to go through the wall. No worry. I know how to do that. Well, that's the way we handle data in these projects, whether it's data integration, whether it's data consumption, whether it's data storage or calculation. We handle everything as if it was we're only going to do it one time and then we'll wipe our hands of it. We can't do that. If you're really serious about this idea of transformation and building blocks of small change leading to bigger change opportunities, you can't do that. You honestly have to start thinking about, how do I do data right? How do I do my, not only data, I use data as a highlighted example here. How do I architect things more consistently, right? Using the same tools, using the same uh, data storage, using the same contextualization, right? Doing it in a very consistent manner so that I'm not just simply creating a one-off or buying another software package or building another solution, right? To be responsible, we've got to think about that standardized architecture approach. That makes sense, Jim?
Makes a whole lot of sense, and it's funny. I think I've written a blog or I've talked about this before. I can't remember exactly where. I think it's one of my old blogs. When I said, when is data going to be just like electricity? Right? We turn a light switch on. We expect you know the light to come on. When we flip the water up, we expect water to flow out of the pipe. Right? Data should be the same way. when we connect to it, we should be able to expect to get what we want when we want. And so I agree with you. You can't take it as a one-off. You have to think about it as, an infrastructure. And you told me, I think the first time we sat down for lunch, probably late 2013, early 2014, you got me thinking that way when I was trying to sell pie. Is how do you think about it is, well, somebody's got an energy management solution, instead of stitching things all together, hey, just plug into my data infrastructure, right? That way I don't have to stitch it together with a whole bunch of other things. Oh, you got it, 2 years later, somebody's got a better energy management solution. I unplug the old one, I plug the new one in, because you're like, here's my data, plug in, go do whatever it is you want to do. And that whole mindset, really kind of changed how I thought about all this. And it's kind of been a mindset I've had ever since. So kudos to you for helping me with that. But I think that's the way we need to think about it. Whatever platform or solution you pick, that has to be the mindset, right?
Yeah, and as I said, it's more than just data. It's platforms, it's software solutions, no doubt about that. But there's a term in lean manufacturing called 5S, right? It's a pretty standard term where and the adage I've heard associated with that is a place for everything and everything in its place.
Yep.
Right? Well, data is the same way. You kind of got to 5S your data, a place for everything and everything in its place. And we as a whole have to learn to get much better at that, much more responsible at that, right? So we're going after this great power called digital transformation, IoT, AI, Industry 4.0. And with that comes great responsibility. We are responsible for doing it well and doing it right. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect out of the gate. There's no such thing as a perfect data structure, right? It's about how do I lay a foundation and get better, right? Not every data point has to be standard. That's not what anybody's saying. But how do I start to become responsible around data? And by the way, we're going to talk a lot today about the operation side, the real-time operation side of data. But also remember the business side of data, right? And the reason I bring that up is we talk about data lakes. Well, in most companies, data lakes are truly data swamps.
They are.
And I've lived in companies like this, right? Where there's no structure or order. Every time somebody wants to do something in a data lake, you know what they do? They recreate a new data structure. There's no discipline. It takes discipline. It takes responsibility to treat your data the right way, to manage your data the right way. And companies as a whole, industry as a whole, has to start to get much more responsible around their data. It is probably the biggest opportunity for improving our capabilities around digital is the data side of the house. So you'll hear me focus a lot on data.
Yeah, because you think about it, just an oversimplified example. At a minimum, you're going to have data from your plant floor, a data historian, whatever, from your MES system, right, which is different than your historian. And then you're going to have one from ERP.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you're trying to build a comprehensive view across the whole plant or the whole company, and you need pieces of all of that to give a comprehensive view. And it's not always easy to do that, because the way the data is structured, and you just can't see it. So.
Yeah. If you're good with it, Jim, I'd like to share a simple diagram
Sure.
of this standard architecture concept. Again, it's more than just data. I don't want to lose sight of that. The data is a key component.
100%.
So let me just share my screen if I could.
Yep.
And then I'll also hopefully blow it up here because this tends to be a little bit busy.
No, Lance Fountain doing a busy screen? No.
Hard to believe, isn't it? Hard to believe.
Very hard to believe. What's funny is I gave him a ration at one of the conferences one time because he put up something even more dense than this, and I'm in the back of the room. I just kind of gave up. I'm like, dude, you're going to have to send me that because there's no way I can see it from back there. And was that like from your Alcoa days? Like you had to put a bunch of stuff on the slides so that people thought you actually knew what you were doing?
It probably was. And what I'll say is everybody uses PowerPoint in a different way. And I've been in organizations that wanted to cram a lot of information on a slide. I've been in organizations that wanted things so high level you could see the slide from 100 yards away.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's
I
how you use it. Like a lot of times when
100%.
I build slides like this, it's for reference.
Yeah, this is great. To me, this is a great reference slide, right? And that's one of the things I try to think about, when I'm doing, I know we're getting off on a little tangent, but doing PowerPoint decks, a lot of times I'll just do some simple pictures, right? And almost no verbiage, right? Because I don't want people reading the slide when I'm trying to tell them a story about something. But an idea like this, there's no way you could imagine this without it kind of being laid out. And it's like, okay, even if I don't consume everything on this particular slide in this particular moment, I can go back and look at it and it starts to click and make sense. Right? So, yeah, I was just giving you a hard time, but
That's okay. You can
this is,
always give me a hard time. If we're
yeah,
not having fun while we're working, Jim, then why are we here?
yeah, yeah.
So let's keep that in mind.
To me, this is good because it's, as you said, this is a great reference. So,
Yeah, and there's a lot on this slide, and I'm going to talk about this slide in segments. And again, this is about standardizing an architecture. Now, there are levels of detail under this. So if a
yep.
really hardcore techie watches this podcast, they might say, "Well, I got to know about what protocol I'm going to use and where are the where are the API sets, and am I going to store?" Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But what we really need to do is stay true to a concept.
Yeah.
And what standardized architecture is all about is learning how to do this one way. And that doesn't have to be the same way for every company. A lot of companies have different investments at the core, and they may make different decisions. But let's be responsible. Let's do it in a standardized fashion. Again, it's breaking the paradigm of every project is going to be a one-off. A one-off for data integration,
Right.
data consumption, a one-off for the software that I use, a one-off for the integration to ERP. Like, we got to stop that. We, as an
Right.
IT/OT community, we've got to stop that.
Yep.
It's not responsible. It ends up costing you more money. It ends up driving up risk of cybersecurity, risk of life cycle. It ends up confusing our customers and uh, driving a myriad of solutions out to the shop floor. It's got to stop.
Yeah.
And we have to be the ones responsible for that.
Yeah.
And you'll also notice on this slide, I guess I'll start here. This slide represents an IT/OT concept. And I want the entire community to get out of this mindset of there's IT and there's OT.
Right.
When you start thinking about the shop floor, you've got to work together. And,
100%.
the idea of, hey, we're going to do everything IT's way, wrong answer. The idea we're going to do everything OT's way, wrong answer. There are reasons those organizations behave like they do. They've got to find ways to come together and work responsibly together. And if you take one thing away from this technology conversation, take that away. I see very few examples of large organizations, especially, that do a good job with IT/OT. And that has, again, it's got to
Very,
change.
very,
It's
very
got
few.
to.
Matter of fact, Ben and I were having this discussion the other day, and he said, he goes, I'm disappointed that more companies haven't done a better job with the IT OT integration. There's still that OT mindset, and this is my little world, and they just there's two different mentalities, and they still don't play well together in a lot of organizations. You know,
Yeah, I've
they
had a
they
lot of.
they
Oh,
look and they look at each other antagonistically instead of, hey, each of us has a role to play in this broader scheme, right? And sometimes your goals are going to be different, right? IT is, say they're focused on security and standardization, and operations want speed and flexibility, and we have to get product out the door. IT doesn't always have that same sense of urgency, and they're like, hey, let's take a little more measured approach because, like, there's some implications here. So sometimes they're a little antagonistic, in that regard, but I think they have to understand each other's world enough so that they can actually work together. But I agree, like, a lot of companies aren't doing that very well still.
yeah,
What,
I get
what,
asked why a lot. Why does IT and OT not work together better than they do? And I don't know that I have a concise answer for that.
right,
I've challenged each side, get outside of your box. I mean, I've worked in both IT and OT in my past. I've worked in IT organizations and OT organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times IT comes to the table already having answers, and they truly don't know the OT world. And I'm going to tell
Not at
you,
all.
for everybody
No.
out there,
Most of the
it's
time.
different.
Yeah.
It's different. I'm going to tell you that it's different. And the OT side of the house, I can say the same thing about. They don't
100%.
understand the risk management side, the management of a broad infrastructure or architecture, based on the cloud, based on on-prem. The complexity of that is tremendous, and with that comes a lot of risk. And if you don't believe the risk is there, just go read the paper.
Oh, I know.
The cyber risk is huge.
Yeah, we've
So,
we've we've had a couple of customers that had cyber attacks, ransomware attacks. You know, it's that
so
can
my
be
advice
really
is
bad.
this: go talk to each other, and don't come in thinking you have the answer. Go talk to each other and
Right.
work together. The companies that learn to work across that line well will succeed far quicker than the ones that continue the battle and the fight.
Yeah. Well, one thing that was
So
in,
what you're
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
One thing that was interesting to me when I went to work at OSI Soft, I thought I was going to be dealing, with OT people primarily because they're the consumers of a tool like Pi. What I found was, especially at the corporate level, I was dealing all with IT. And what was interesting was IT didn't really know all of the reasons why OT would want certain things or not other things and things of that nature. And then, OT certainly didn't understand IT's plight. I often found I was kind of the translator, and I come from an OT background. All the IT, information I know is since probably mostly since 2013 because I've had to learn how IT people speak, how they think, what they're concerned about. We end up becoming the translator sometimes in our world, being in the integration and consultation side. Sometimes we're the one that speaks to both sides because we have enough understanding of both that we can explain to the OT people, here's why the IT people are concerned about this. We can explain to the IT people, here's why we need this sense of urgency and why this is really important. We have to get product out the door, and this will really help you save money in doing so. It's
Yeah. To your point,
sometimes we have to be translators.
when you think about the translator term, it's really about understanding both sides. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
translator for a language, you
Yep.
understand both sides.
Yep.
Same thing here. And I think the best thing people can do that don't have both an IT and OT background is assume you don't completely understand the other side, right? Be open-minded, have a growth mindset, right? Learn.
Yeah.
Again, because I've seen people come in from both sides saying, I've got this, I know. Maybe you don't. Let's be open-minded. This is about the companies we serve. It's not about us. It's not about who's smarter.
Yeah.
It's about how we work together to find the right solution.
Yep.
And it takes both sides working together.
Yep.
So I'll jump into the slide for a minute, and I'm going to just explain some of the concepts here. Again, this is high level. There's a ton of detail underneath here, and detail will vary. But the first thing I'll point out is at the top and the bottom, you see very similar models, but based on different sources of data or sources of systems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So embedded here in the bottom, in this white rectangle at the bottom, we have ISA 95, 0, 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
Generally, these systems tend to be on-prem. There's a reason for it, right? It's high-speed, real-time data. It could be an instrument. It can be an event. It can be a measurement, generally close to real-time. And it's a different nature of data. I'll start by saying that.
Right.
At the top, we have ISA 95 level 4, the IT world. So OT world at the bottom, IT world at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Level 4 is your ERP world and beyond. There's more data than just ERP data. And we make a pretty significant investment in designing, developing, and deploying ERP. Very similarly, we make tremendous capital investments in designing and deploying process control systems, automation systems,
Yep.
instrument systems, MES solutions. We do. So they're very capital intensive. Now, if you look at what's changing in the world, traditional ISA 95 defined different levels of systems and data. But if you look at what's changing in the world, the secret sauce of a lot of what's happening in data consumption, data analytics, is about how do we pull all the data together and integrate all the data. That's why I spend so much time talking about the data. Now, I'm going to pause there for a second. We're going to come back to data in just a second. I'm going to pause there. That doesn't mean there aren't all kinds of opportunities to advance hardware and software on the source system side. You know, I look at what's happening with drones and auto-guided vehicles and vision systems and edge technology and even the evolution of MES. There are all kinds of things you can continue to do here.
Yes, for sure.
They tend to be projects that have longer turnaround time. They tend to be more traditional waterfall approach. They tend to be more capital intensive. I say 10. I'm not trying to back us in a corner here. But it doesn't mean you won't do great projects there. But those are still in the heart of ISA 95 level 0, 1, 2, and 3, and ISA 95 level 4.
Yep.
Now what I want to do is shift gears. And I want to talk about what we do on top of that data. So, yeah, let's start here. Let's say the first thing we want to do is if I'm going to visualize data, business insights, dashboards, calculations, KPIs, I want to pull, remember we talked about the electricity example in the house. You want to plug in and it's there.
Yep.
When I do a project in that space, I don't want my first reaction to be, oh, I got to go find the data. I got to clean the data. I got to prepare the data. And then every project I do, I'll just start that all over again. And I'll get the data, clean the data, tune the data, and then do a second project, a third project. That's not how we want to approach that.
Well, and that's kind of where most companies are.
You're right.
A lot of the things we're still doing are in that regard. We're trying to think about, okay, I still have to do this, but I have to think about how am I going to do this 100 times across all their facilities, or whatever, or thousands of times, right? So it's a kind of standardized approach, but so that the next time it's not so hard, to get that data cleaned and contextualized and able to be put somewhere down the road. So
yeah, I worked with a controls engineer one time. I had a PhD in data science, and it's a great story because he was ready to quit one day, and we kind of talked to him about why all the frustration. He said, I want to do data science, and every time I go to do a project, I spend 80% of my time on the data.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells you the story. Do we want to pay PhD data scientists 80% just to go and find and massage data? No. And again, this is that being responsible side. So data is a big part of it. So let's talk a little more about it. So I've got these two sides of the house, and we're going to talk about how they come together in a minute. But there's the same concept here. So I've got it labeled here, a manufacturing data fabric and a business data fabric. Well, we build out our business data fabric. For the most part, we build it out in data lakes. I'm not going to use the term data swamp here again yet, but we build it out in data lakes. And you know what? We haven't necessarily done a good job. There are a lot of messy data lakes out there, and we still do one-off projects to get on the data lake, against the data lake. Then we got the manufacturing data fabric. These two data fabrics are inherently different. One is a transactional business world. The other is a real-time operation world. And we've got to, right here, right out of the gate, we got to stop thinking it's all the same. In my opinion, 30 years of experience, it's not all the same. They inherently are different in nature. So the first thing is, can you accept you're going to have both a manufacturing data fabric and a business data fabric? I want everybody to ask themselves that question, because in my mind, you can't do this any other way.
I agree.
Okay?
Yep.
Now, let's stay at the bottom here. We don't have today in most companies, we don't have a manufacturing data fabric. So this is collecting and historizing all the data from our instruments and control systems, uh, automation systems, all our data from MES, and it's putting it into some type of standardized context. Okay? So every plan is different. Yes, that is absolutely true. But they have similarities. And if I work for a large company like two I worked for, it's our responsibility to develop data standards in those companies. It's what makes us that company, right? I call it the language of our company. It's what makes us part of that company.
Yeah, and
So
I,
what
I
are
have
your
a
standards?
question.
Yeah,
I have a question written down about that I'm going to ask at some point. That's what I was writing down earlier, because specifically with one of the companies you work for, Cargill, they make a lot of different stuff. They're into a lot of different things,
yeah.
right? So how do you
So
get to that? So continue.
great question. Great question. And the truth is you make conscious decisions. And not every data point has to be standard either. I think I mentioned that before,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't have to be standard everything. But you start on this journey to standardization, standard KPIs, standard performance metrics, standard leading indicators, right? But you also do it by levels of commonality. So what do I want to be unique at a site? What do I want to be common across like assets? So if I have crush plants, pot lines, blast furnace, you name it, right? What do I want to be common? Again, it's not everything. It's a starting point. So I can be common across the whole company. I can be common by manufacturing process. I can be common by asset. I can be common by product. That's the other thing to call out. When people think about this idea of data in context or data twin, you'll see I have the word data twin written there.
Hmm. We
It's
talked about
not
that
just
last
one.
time. Yep.
It's not just one data twin. It's not just one data twin. Now, some of the data can be the same core source data, but you might have it represented in multiple different twins based on the persona you're serving.
Yeah, because like
So,
how maintenance person thinks about and organizes their data is very different than a process engineer in a lot of cases.
spot on correct. Spot on correct.
Yeah, we see
And
that
and
a lot.
again, don't feel that's wrong. Feel it's right. Because some of the core source data may be the same, but you may just map it differently.
We tell people
So
all the time you're probably going to have multiple AF databases or multiple AF hierarchies in one database, depending on how you want to do it. And that's okay. We've taught people that. That is
that's
absolutely okay, depending
correct.
on the persona that you're serving. They think about it and want it organized differently.
It's a good way to think about it. Persona is a good way to think about it. And again, don't let best get in the way of better. You start this journey. And one thing I'll challenge the tech companies with, there needs to be better tools to pull off this contextualization across an enterprise. I'm going to challenge the tech companies on that because
Yeah.
we're not where we need to be today. And I think there's a lot of reasons why. There's probably some IT/OT tension there. There's probably some cloud tension there. We need good tools to manage this common contextualization database.
I'll
And
tell you
it
one
by
thing.
persona, by enterprise. And again, we have to make intentional decisions about where we want to be common and where we can be unique. It's not a one size fits all.
I'll tell you one thing we've been looking at recently is Flow software, and their idea is if I want to build that contextualization layer, I can connect to if I have multiple data historians, connect to my ERP system, whatever it is, I can connect to it and build true asset models with all of that data contextualized. Doesn't necessarily matter the underlying technology. So a lot of the stuff that you and I have been used to doing in, say, asset framework. Well, what if I don't have Pi? What if I have Wonderware Historian, Canary, IP21, or some combination thereof, Data Park? I have some combination of those depending on, well, we've made 3 acquisitions in the last 5 years and everybody had something different. And this plan over here, they went off on their own and said, hey, we don't want to spend all that money for a Pi system. We put Canary in and we like it. well, how do I build that? And so we've looked at their solution, and I think they've made some significant progress in that space. You know, I think they've taken that challenge on. From what we've seen of it, it looks really solid. You know, we're hoping we can get some projects with it. You know, coming up, we're pretty excited about that. But I'm it's a it's well thought out. I know that. So
Yeah, and
continue.
there are going to be players out there. Obviously OSI Soft Aviva is out there. Rockwell's playing in this space.
They are
Siemens is playing in this space. And I'm not here to endorse any one product.
right.
I will say this: the tools need to evolve,
Yes.
and I think this has gotten far too little attention in regard to how we manage enterprise data twins.
Well, and I
Again,
think
data based on persona is fine, but we need to be able to get better at it. We need help from our tech partners
right,
in how we do that.
and I think we've been hurt a little bit in the industry with I think we talked about this a little bit in part one. We're just kind of talked about how do we get here or how we got here. I think from a market perspective, right? Aviva acquiring OSI Soft, or OSI Soft kind of floating for a couple years until they got acquired. Then they got acquired, and everybody's trying to figure out what to do. You lost 3 or 4 years in that development cycle,
Yeah, I agree.
right? Then you look at the traditional automation vendors like Rockwell, Siemens, those types. It's not really their focus. It's kind of a Me Too thing for them. Can they do it? Yes. Do they have that? Yes, right? Especially if you're standardized on Rockwell, yes, everything plays well together. But what if I have a couple of old Siemens controllers and a GE controller over there in my plant too that I just haven't gotten to yet and probably won't for the next 2, 3, 4 years? What do I do with them? Right? That then it gets a little funky. Um, I'm starting to think there's going to be some other players out there that are more agnostic that
Maybe.
are we're
They
seeing
have.
people like Flow. I mean, HiByte's another one where they're talking about data ops and things of that nature. There's other players that are kind of like what we always looked at from a Pi perspective. Was Pi was very agnostic. They didn't care what control system you had. We can connect to it. We can get the data in there for you and give you a standardized platform, to view it. Well, now we've had a kind of a 4 year or 5 year lag, and we're all clamoring. We want more, just like what you're saying. We want more, and I agree with you. I think all the tech companies really have to think about it and think about what they're doing, and I think it's going to evolve. And I actually think maybe I'm even getting ahead here, but I think there's going to be some bifurcation and some splitting of the technologies. You may have an underlying time series database that has a different contextualization layer, that has a
Right.
different visualization that can be used at an individual plant or corporately. I can
Yeah.
see that happening now. I,
And we're going to talk
I
more
was,
about that, I think, as
yeah,
we go up the stack. But I
yeah,
will say this. The tools have to get better here, no doubt about it. And the other
agreed.
point you made, I want to highlight very strongly. You go into any large company, you are going to have a ton of diversity down here at 0, 1, 2,
100,
and 3.
100%.
I mean, don't even imagine you won't. You will. And then you go through mergers and acquisitions and greenfields. It's a complete and utter chaos in regard to the systems that you have.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to be critical. It's how
It's just
evolved.
reality. Matter
So
of
you got
fact,
to just
I
realize
talked
this
to
player has to be.
I talked with David and Vlad the other day on the Manufacturing Hub podcast, right? And they've been talking all July about standardization, and they're a little bit more automation focused, but then they get into the data. So a lot of times I come on. I think that was my fourth time on, third or fourth time coming on, and we talked about data standardization, but they had spent some time literally talking about that bottom layer, and I weighed in on a couple of things because when I was working for Rockwell, as you're doing now, I wanted people to standardize on our technology, and I thought we had a great offering to be able to do that, right? We had the ability to support you, no matter what vintage you're on. We could still support you, and there's a lot of plug and play and a lot of commonality. Siemens kind of did the same thing. So I at least felt like, and as I got into the out of Rockwell and into the integration space, I felt like, okay, those are two companies that you could strongly recommend to a customer, and you feel like they can handle most of the technology that you're looking for. But again, you're going to have a myriad of stuff. Like if you're Rockwell and we're just talking PLCs, I guarantee you there's still people running PLC 5s out there and have no plans of changing them. There's still people that have 15-year-old ControlLogix processors and have no plans on changing them unless they have to. All the way up to the latest ones.
Oh, absolutely.
And oh yeah.
That's
and then
even a single manufacturer, by the way. Then it doesn't even take into account that when you go to Europe, you probably have a lot larger footprint of Siemens.
For sure.
And in process industries, you're going to see Emersons and Honeywells, and
I know process companies that have, Delta V. They have Yokogawa. They have Experion from Honeywell. They have Foxborough stuff, all in the same. Because of mergers and acquisitions and all these different things, they probably have one of everything ever made.
You can bet on it. You can bet on it almost. So anyway, I think, the point here is it's got to be agnostic, and we have to bring a continuous improvement mindset to it, and the tools have to improve.
Correct.
But this is, you hear me talk about data a lot. And as I said before, when you look at this whole picture, it's not all data. It's about software and standardizing software. It's about hardware, standardizing hardware. But I'll tell you, in this new world, it's a lot about data. So you'll hear me hit that point over and over and over again.
Yep.
So again, by the way, same thing up here in the business data fabric, same concept, except now it's transactional data. By the way, it's not just ERP data. It can be location data. It can be customer data, supply data. I mean, it's not all coming just from your ERP.
Yeah.
Now, when you think about these, when you think about these two data fabrics and the concept of evolving them to keep getting better, and those data fabrics becoming your data infrastructure that you plug into, you can imagine a future where, the things we do on top of that data will get a lot easier, a whole lot easier once our data store gets better, right? Like the PhD example I gave you, right? His life is going to get easier if he knows where to go and get the data, and the data is somewhat standard. Now, again, it's a journey to get there. No one's saying different, but it's an important point.
It's funny. I was talking to a lady at a large manufacturer. I'll just say that the other day, and she was trying to get some data out of kind of an MES level system, and she's asking the people who know that system, hey, give me some kind of a schema here so I understand where the data exists. Otherwise, I've got 700 tables I got to go poking through and just see what's available. And I got to go do that every time. To your point. Exactly to your point. She's spending way too much time trying to figure out, like, I know the data's here. Which one of these 700 tables is an exaggeration, but which one of these tables is it in? So she's poking around, trying to find it. And a lot of times it's not even in the same tables. Well, why isn't this in the same table as that? Because they're related. It's the schema of the system. So very much to your point, she spends a ton of time trying to go just find it, to build a Power BI dashboard that's comprehensive, that has Pi data, MES data, etc. So absolutely to your point. And that was literally this week.
So just a couple other things quickly. As we think about how we visualize data, dashboards, KPIs, there are a lot of tools to do that. What I've found, what I continue to find, is a lot of those tools are starting to put their own getting too excited. A lot of those tools are starting to put their own data management systems in place because they're taking for granted that companies can't do this well. What you're seeing data management capabilities getting brought into some of these tool sets, and it's a separate element of functionality, but they're bringing it in because most companies don't do a good job of these data fabrics.
Perfect example is Power BI.
Yeah,
in the
and
demo.
again, there's AI solutions, and I won't say names that do the same thing.
Hmm.
The point I'm making here is you need to get good at this data fabric. Then visualizing the data or even running analytics, machine learning analytics, AI analytics, model predictive control analytics, all that will get easier once you have a sound data foundation to build on top of.
Yeah.
So you do that against your business fabric, by the way, and you do it against your manufacturing data fabric. It's the same concept. They're just two different sources of data.
So it looks like kind of what you're doing, this digitally supported work. These two things kind of meet in the middle. Is what kind of what you're advocating?
Yeah.
Is that the way I'm reading that?
Well, there are different users for the manufacturing data fabric and the business data fabric.
Yep.
Different personas, different users. Now, important call out. Those two fabrics need to integrate. Generally, your business data fabric is considered to be your official record, your
Mm-hmm.
official uh, performance database, right? Whether that's
Right.
finance performance, whether it's shift performance, batch performance, daily performance, daily throughput, daily yield, OEE, there are official records.
Yep.
So at some level, you summarize the information in the manufacturing data fabric
You
and
push
you
it up.
roll it up. By the way, very similarly, there is some information that comes down, order numbers, um, specifications, product specifications,
Yep.
finance information. I'll give you an example of this, and it's kind of a taboo topic, but maybe you want to do daily P&L at a plant. And people would say to me, "You can't do daily P&L." It doesn't matter if you get it exactly right. Can you get it directionally correct? Because what you want to do is change behaviors on the shop floor or make decisions on the shop floor to be able to impact month-end results.
Yeah, we
So
talk about that
sometimes
too. Yep.
sometimes it has to go both ways. So again, they're not completely independent. I just wanted to call that out. They do integrate.
Yeah,
But when you talk about
we actually to that point, we actually have a project we're working on right now where month end there's this monstrous spreadsheet that's all SAP numbers, and they want an idea of how are we tracking toward that on a daily basis. And maybe you can't get the exact cost, but we're going to pick like a standard cost, like at the beginning of the year, that, hey, this is our standard cost for raw materials, chemicals, whatever it is, and then build some calculations against that, right, against those standard costs. Is it 100% accurate? No, but it's directionally accurate and should be in the right order of magnitude, right? If the standard cost may be you're $60,000 positive, the official number may be 55, it may be 67, but you're directionally in order of magnitude very, very close.
that's right.
And
Yep.
so, to your point, we're seeing that we're working on projects to that end for that very reason, because people want, am I going the right direction on a daily basis? And if I'm in the middle of the month and I see that I'm trending off course, I want to be able to make a course correction in the middle of the
Right.
month and not end up in the wrong place by the end. And I just don't know it.
Yep.
So
That's
we're seeing
exactly correct.
we're
And
seeing that.
making prescriptive decisions along the way
Mm-hmm.
to get you to the right place at month end. And again, it's not about it being exactly correct. It's about letting people know, are we doing a good job or aren't we doing a good job?
Yep.
The more visibility, the better. Now, the only other thing I was going to add in the digitally supported work is, again, all kinds of different personas set here. Whether they use data from the business data fabric or the manufacturing data fabric, it doesn't matter. But you give people what they need to effectively do their job. And a lot of times when you're thinking about manufacturing processes, manufacturing technology, that is operations data fabric. You're looking at things near real time. You're
Mm-hmm.
looking at performance of a continuous process by the hour, right? You're seeing events, alarms. You're seeing alarms on and events on packaging lines uh, in the seconds, right? In some cases, milliseconds,
Yeah.
right? So again, that needs to be supported. That needs to be supported differently than looking at a transaction day by day.
Yep.
So just keep that in mind. The different personas, they'll turn to the right data to do their job.
And that would be
So
one of the
in a nutshell, I mean,
there's a lot of personas. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a lot of personas who need data from both sides to get a good picture. Like you get to director, vice president level, they very much need data from both sides to understand how am I doing.
yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. The only other thing you'll see baked into here is how far does the cloud go down the stack? And what we're finding more and more, and this is as to be expected, the cloud is coming further down the stack as networks get better. I don't think the cloud is capable of doing everything that's done on-prem, and I think we need to be mindful of that. Mm-hmm. But yes, the cloud is coming down into the manufacturing space, no question about it. So something else we have to keep in mind.
So Lance, one of the things I wrote this down, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes in, and I wanted to wait to the appropriate time. And I think you're kind of done describing this, and I think this is really good. You're trying to build a fabric for both sides to have some kind of standard data model to work with, right? Where they can just, it's like the receptacle. They can just go plug in, go find their data, and build whatever it is they're trying to build, whether it's a KPI dashboard in Power BI or Pi, or building some AI solution, or whatever it is, right? Here's the data. We know how it's contextualized. We know where to go find it. Looks relatively the same across business units, etc. But here's one thing that I wrote down, and we had a quick talk off camera because I had to give you a couple of very specific examples of kind of where I'm thinking about this. But building KPIs, and I think about your former company in Cargill, right? They make a lot of different things. They have some batch process, they have some continuous process. Some places they're sending out stuff on pallets, and they're really counting widgets. How many widgets did I make? Other times it's how many gallons or tons that I put out, through a rail car or truck or something along those lines. And so sometimes the metrics and the KPIs get a little different. I've seen OE calculate a lot of different ways, depending on if you're a batch, continuous, or or you're making or doing discrete. So what's your thought process around standardizing those KPIs, even across very different businesses? Because, Cargill would have certainly been a massive challenge in that.
Yeah, so I guess I would start by saying these are intentional decisions. And, from a standpoint of technology enablement, we can guide, but we need the business to make decisions around how they do this effectively for the business.
Right.
So you think about the highest level, you may think about things like performance against target, or overall effectiveness.
Yep.
Stability might be metrics, and the reason I use those, you can generally calculate those very generically.
Yes, you can.
Across complex processes. Performance against target, something of that nature.
That's an easy one, yeah.
At the very highest level, I think you have very few operational KPIs that you would agree on across a complex company like a Cargill, or like an Alcoa, or whoever it might be. Right. And it's very few. And this is why I said before, don't let best get in the way of better, because you can over-design it out of the gate, no question about it.
Right.
So at the highest level,
and that was
keep
one
it very
thing and that was one thing we talked about off camera. There was a project we were a part of that I felt like was a little bit over-designed, and that was an Achilles heel, because I felt like the users were tired before any solution was built out, and they kind of had already thrown up their hands and said, I'm not messing with that. That's not what you want at all.
Now let me build upon it. So at the highest level, simple, things that can give you some evaluation of performance at the very highest level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what most companies do, I believe, why are companies companies? Because there's some element of process, right? Like manufacturing technology, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
So the next level down is for that manufacturing technology. If I have 100 crush plants, or 20 pot lines, or it could be anything you want it to be, but I'm operating them alike,
And we're not
That's
talking
your
marijuana, just so y'all know. He's talking about Alcoa and aluminum. So,
yeah, aluminum pots. Yes, that's
yep.
correct. But there's probably other pot factories out there as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
But but the point is, you're going to define if you have like processes, you're going to define KPIs that you're going to use to baseline and benchmark the performance of that process.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty consistent expectation. You know, if I own a company and I have 20 plants that do very similar things, then my intellectual property is how do I measure my performance of those pretty similar things,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can call that a manufacturing process and manufacturing technology. And again, you can't take it too far. I'll give you an example of a pot line. A pot line can have multiple technologies under it, right? A pre-bake or a soda bird. Well, they're two different processes. So you might have high-level KPIs, but when you dig a little bit deeper, you're going to have to extensiate those KPIs differently. So maybe I have a subset that's by type of technology. And then eventually you get to a point where it's pretty site unique. That's okay. That's probably 50, 60% of your data, maybe more. It's site unique. You just have to make intentional decisions on what you want to measure common and at what level in your organization. And my general rule of thumb is keep it simple. Start simple.
Yeah.
Here's what I think will happen. If you start simple, you can evolve to bring in more. If you overcomplicate it out of the gate, you'll probably self-destruct.
Yeah. I agree. And, it's interesting. We're working on a project now, and they have a dashboard. It's in Excel today, and we're converting it into a Pi Vision dashboard where it's real time. And it's wildly important goals scorecard. And one of the two metrics is like month to date performance against this metric, and yesterday, like how did I do yesterday, and then how am I doing for the month. And the kind of the issue we're seeing is this is in a spreadsheet. Only one person owns it. It doesn't get updated all the time. A lot of people can't even see it. People who could actually affect the numbers and make them better can't see it. And so the idea is to push it out to more people in a standardized way. Well, one of the things we were kind of thinking about too is, well, let's build the visual for the individual metric and the underlying calculations, because there was the month to date, year to date, yesterday, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, best month ever, average. Those are all metrics that we can build out standard. It doesn't really matter what the KPI is. And what I told Nick, who was working on it, I said, look, because he had different templates in there, and I said, well, here's the one thing you can do is all these metrics you can build in a very standardized way. Take yesterday, and either that's your a complex set of calculations, because sometimes it is, and other times it's just a pi tag. Just reference that, but always have yesterday's calculation. Then all your metrics look exactly the same. Then you can visualize them all the same. And so then that way, if we go to the next plant, we can say, okay, we don't really care what the metric is. We can calculate all these numbers and we can show it to you the exact same way and build that out relatively quickly. As soon as we understand the underlying calculations, which sometimes can be,
it's more of a normalized approach.
It's a normalized approach. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, I did a video, my last YouTube video was actually about that. And I actually showed, I showed how Abel, Nick, and myself all thought about how can we do this in some kind of a standardized way, or even if we put 25 of them on the screen, that it's not overwhelming. That's the goal. Or, it's funny, the feedback we got, he had 14 metrics on there, and the feedback he got is, this is a little bit busy. Like, I can't see some of these numbers because they're too small. I can see the bar graphs, but I can't see the numbers. In all honesty, that's kind of what we wanted. We wanted you to see the red. Like, okay, I told them, I said yesterday, I said, I can walk in my door, and if that screen's up on my monitor, I can say, okay, I've got two red bars for two KPIs, which means yesterday I was bad and month to date I'm bad. Let's go drill in on those first. Right. And so, for us, we're trying to build things like, even if the KPIs are different, we can build it in such a way that we can present it to you the same way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it also, when you start sharing that more broadly and you get it in front of the right people, it helps connect people to desired outcomes,
Right.
right? And
And
the
that doesn't
example I'll give
happen
you,
enough.
I remember one time I was talking with an operator on the shop floor. I was interviewing them actually, and we talked about KPIs. And I had asked the question, "Do you know how you're doing every day against your key KPIs?" And he said, "I don't even know what the KPIs are." And think about how much of a shame that is that the person that's running your process doesn't know what good looks like,
Yeah,
right?
we talked about
Your
that. Matter of
point about
fact, I just did well, actually, no, I didn't do a quick video. I was rewatching part two. We talked about that. Do we even know what good looks like? Do our operators know what good looks like?
it's important. It's important, and that's why taking some of these steps, keeping it simple, but taking some of these steps, you're starting down that path. And I think what will happen is,
Yep.
with some level of buy-in, people will ask for more. They'll want more, and it'll evolve in a continuous improvement mindset, as it should. We
Yeah.
should not. This should be agile. This space right here of the manufacturing data fabric should be agile,
And
and we shouldn't try to design it to be perfect out of the gate. That's not the point, right?
and I think to your point, anytime you're doing one of these, and this is the mentality we try to keep, right? If we're doing a project, we're trying to do it. I always challenge my people, and the reason why I do this is because I remember something Rick Smith said to me at a PI conference years ago, and I'll relay that story here in a minute. And Rick works for International Paper, but I tell all my people, when you build something, build it in such a way that you could deploy it 100 more times easily, even if it's a one-off, because you really don't know if what you're building is a one-off or we're going to do this 100 more times. So if you build it in a way that's just a one-off, hey, I got that done, then there's no chance without a lot of redesign on how to do this again.
Yeah. That was the point we were making earlier when we talked about one-offs, right?
Correct.
And again,
and
we talk about it a lot in the sense of data, but it's more than just data too.
Yeah,
I want to make that clear.
it is, and the reason why I think that way was I remember, I was talking to Rick. We used to have these sessions. We'd sit at the Hilton Union Square Hotel. We'd sit at one of those tables out front. A lot of times early in the morning after we go for a run or something, and we'd sit and chat about stuff as we're cooling down. And sometimes we draw stuff out on napkins. And I was his account manager at the time. I was managing the International Paper account for OSI Soft, and I said to him, I said, if I sold you guys an enterprise agreement tomorrow, you don't have enough resources to go deploy it out. And he said, yeah, I know we're going to need outside help, at some point. But the problem is when we've used outside help, and use some kind of an integrator, the problem is they think about, okay, this particular mill needs something done. They do it. And I hear that, hey, we solved this particular problem at this particular mill. And it's like, well, great. I have 10 more mills who have that same problem. I go look at how they did it, and they solved it so specifically for that mill, I can't even use their solution. And he said, we see that a lot.
That's right. That's very common. That's very common. I've seen that hundreds of times.
And
it's very common.
And that stuck with me.
Then you'll get a leader. But then you'll get a leader that says, I want that everywhere. And you really can't put it everywhere. Because it's designed to be one.
And so that's one of the things I always challenge my people every time I bring somebody in. I tell them that story. And I tell them, because we've taken some things we've done at one facility and moved it to another, like for even almost sometimes even a different application, but we built something standardized in a way that's very easy to port and move. Like one of the things we've been working on, we've done it 3 times now, or we're deploying it for the 3rd time, is spare pump compliance. Like just looking at alternating your spares where your spare is actually a spare. The problem is people will run their primary pump 100% of the time, then it goes down, they turn the spare on, well, it won't run either because all the seals are dried out and cracked because the thing hasn't run in years. Well, now you're down, and that's not really what the intention of that is, and so people don't really manage that well. So we built a solution where, okay, we can manage that for you, you know, in a Pi infrastructure. If you have all this stuff in Pi, we can do it. And all we need to know is whether or not it's running. We have a bunch, all the other metrics are calculated. And we have a standard kind of view that we can build in Pi Vision that, you know, doesn't take very long to put together. And it's, but the thing is, when Ben and I first built that for the first customer, we were thinking about, okay, this isn't going to be the only customer that ever asks us for this. How do we build it in such a way that everyone who is in a heavy industry has this particular issue? They have, you know, a primary and a secondary of something. Maybe it's not a pump, maybe it's a fan, or maybe it's something else. There's, this is going to come up.
Any company that's truly going after digital transformation has to really understand the need for scale.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, if you're a single site company and, you know, you're just doing digital, you could probably get away with a one-off approach. If you're a large company and you're serious about digital transformation, the key is to be able to scale and rapidly scale, be of an agile mindset, which primarily fits on this data and visualization and analytics, you know, model, right? So again, learning to be good at that, learning to drive continuous improvement, learning to scale. It's a gap today that we have to address at so many of our customers, right? Your customers, at so many of our companies, my companies, you know, the companies I've worked for and with. So again, it's a learning journey, but I think the whole purpose of this 3-part series was really to think about where we are, how we got there, what the future needs to become, and then how do we go after that future responsibly. And I think that's kind of how we broke down these 3 parts.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is valuable for a lot of the people out there watching.
Yeah, I hope so too. You know, and one of the things that will be interesting, this will be the kind of series that I post every 6-8 months or every year and say, okay, how do we do? Because we've been talking about some things, you know, past, you know, present, future. Do these things still hold true? Do some of the things you and I have talked about still hold true? And what's interesting is I go back and look at some of the things that I talked about, wrote about 5-6 years ago, were 100% spot on. And at the time, I didn't even realize how much of a prophet I was going to be about that stuff, right? But just being around this stuff, talking to smart people like you just kind of figure out, looks like this is the way things are going. And, you know, one of the ones that I'm still predicting, I think we got about 7 years left, is our plants are going to be running worse in 7 years than they are today, and worse than they were 3 years ago. I said in 10, because I think I made the video 3 years ago, and I said in 10 years our plants will be running worse despite so much advances in technology, because we don't have enough people who know what good looks like. So I'm curious to see how our discussions here in 2023 hold in 2024, 5, 6, and beyond. I have a feeling they're going to hold true.
The people side is the big risk. I agree with you. I just think it is time to pivot. You know, every company that might watch this, every individual that might watch this, everyone that's interested in smart manufacturing, digital transformation, the future's got to be different. And I have 100%. To tell you, I think leaders have to be responsible, right? We can't just keep doing this things the same way and hoping somehow we'll be successful at the end of the day. Low-cost labor is not coming back. You know, we're going to continue to face challenges with cost and supply chain and world events. Leaders have to be responsible for this pivot. And to be responsible, you got to understand the need to do it. So I think what we've outlined will hold true. Things will evolve. Technology will evolve. We may tweak some of our opinions around the standard architecture. Mm-hmm. But the point that we can't lose is we've got to prepare for something a whole lot different. And, you know, the cop-out is, hey, things will change and we'll get to it next year. You know, you start to become a laggard in this space, you're going to be a laggard for a long time to come.
Yeah.
And I think the companies that will be highly successful are the ones that can find a way to be on the front end of the change.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, Lance, I appreciate you coming on for spending, gosh, a little over 3 hours with me on these. That's it's been super to me, super beneficial, not just for me, but hopefully the people that are watching it. So much appreciated, and know you're working a new job now. So thanks for breaking out of that for a few minutes and chatting with me
Well,
here. So much appreciated.
maybe every year we ought to do an update just to see
Yeah,
how things have changed and how we feel about the progress. But happy to do that, Jim, and thanks for having me.
absolutely. And once again, thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.